Hey all, continuing our ngSkinTools introductory series, we will now look at layers. I already showed some of the basics in our first video and mentioned that skinning layers is mostly what this plugin is all about, so let's have a closer look. And let's leave Maya aside for now. So here we are in GIMP, which is one of those image editing applications that support layers. And in essence, this means that we can do things like this. I paint something in one layer, create another one, paint something here, and then most importantly I can do things like erase something here, and you can see that while I delete the red color, I uncover the blue color on the layer beneath it. It doesn't always have to be either this or that. You can actually have a semi-transparent parts of the layer. So let's say my delete brush is just 50%. So when I delete, this part becomes a combination between the upper layer and the lower layer. There's some red color and blue color. Or you can just reduce the opacity of the whole layer and do like this. So basically, to blend two layers together, the upper layer has to have some transparency in it. So this is very important to remember when we talk about skinning layers. So I think you know how painful would it be to edit a picture in a single layer, but unfortunately this is what Maya paint tools make us do when editing skin weights. Over time, people learned a few techniques to overcome this limitation, like locking influences or only adding weight and not removing it. But it still remains a pretty linear process, and you have to really plan in advance painting some parts, or you just end up with a complete mess and need to start over. So with layers, there's much more freedom. Let's see where we left off in our previous video. So we created somewhat decent weights on the spine, added clavicles, but we can see that the shoulder part is yet to be done. So let's continue here. We know that for the upper arm we want to control roughly this part of the mesh. And we have multiple joints going down the length of the arm, so we want to have nice transitions between those as well. So let's start with the layer, call it upper arm, find our twists, and first what I'm gonna do is to do a seemingly crazy thing and just flood the whole layer to a value of 1 to the first join. So currently, as you might expect, the deformation doesn't make sense at all. We can see that the mesh follows the upper arm, but the rest of the deformation is just wrong, and that's because the layer is not transparent at all. Everything is painted to value of 1 to this joint, and we cannot see through to the clavicle layer or the spine layer. So how do we fix it? So for that we use something called layer mask, and it's a multiplier. So everywhere where I will paint a value of 1, the layer is visible, and value of 0, layer is invisible. And you can have other values as well, so I can actually smooth it as well a bit, so it's not a hard transition. And let's see how the deformation looks now. So much better. We have our spine back, our clavicles back, and the upper arm follows as well. We still need to tweak this the mask here, because we can see that it affects this part of the mesh too much. So I can actually scale it a bit. Let's say like this. So right now I'm actually not removing weights from the joint itself. It's still painted to a value of 1, but I'm defining an overall transparency of the layer independently of which influences it's painted to. And it will be very useful in the next step that I'm going to do. So if you remember, we had multiple joints we wanted to have in this layer. So we wanted to have at least this, and this. For the demonstration, I will just pick a single joint here, and it should affect this part of the arm here. So we can see that we still need to work on the transition between the first joint that we painted and the second. And because it's all on a different layer than clavicles or the spine, I can simply do a smooth flood here, and we will have this transition done for us, and that's it. Of course, you would be a little bit more precise when painting an actual model. For the demonstration, I will just not care here. So you can see that we still have what we wanted. So we have the spine performing well, we have clavicles as we painted, and we have this upper arm, which now has a nice transition between the two joints. And you can see how the mask helps us here. So we divided the task of having transitions between upper arm joints and having a nice blend with the rest of the model into 2 steps. So the mask defines how this layer blends into the model, and then we only worry about transition when painting the 2 influences here. So it's very convenient. So I can independently say that, okay, I now want this part to be smoother, or I want just to remove some of the weight on of the upper arm here completely, and we still have the transition between this and this joint as we paint it in here. So I would very much recommend that you, whenever you use layers, you would very much default to using layer mask. So what else on the layers? So if you remember, we didn't spend a lot of time painting clavicles, and that's okay. With the layers, you can go back and revisit each part independently. So let's say if I would now go back and we want to edit the clavicles, it will not affect anything I painted on the upper arm or the spine. So it's a very nice non-linear process when approaching your skin weights. All you have to remember is that you only worry about how layer blends into the rest of the model and what influences you want to have in this layer. That's it. So hopefully this clears up a bit on skinning layers. I think there are quite a few questions that you might have, so leave those in the comments, and I'll see you in the next video.